In this video, we are talking about seller financing and agreements for sale, which are super duper similar, but very different in one key way. So stay tuned all the way till the end. What's up, everybody? It's Cassandra Lopez with the Bremerton Broker channel. If you're new to the channel, you're going to want to go ahead and subscribe. This channel is all about creative investment strategies. Maybe you inherited a property through probate and it won't sell through conventional means because of the condition. Maybe you just bought a house 6 months ago and now you're getting divorced and you have no equity. Now what? Or maybe you're just tired of being a landlord. So this whole channel is full of strategies and tips and ideas for you. So be sure to subscribe, tap that little bell, reach out to me. This is my cell phone and my email if you need any support. What is seller financing? So seller financing is essentially buyer buys a home, and instead of going to a bank to get their own mortgage, they're asking the seller to be the bank. They're asking the seller to carry the note. And basically what that looks like is the seller takes title as the recorded owner of record, and then the seller files a deed of trust against the property, showing their equitable interest in the property and that the buyer has to make payments. We actually have forms specifically for this in our Northwest MLS. And I just did one of these with a client. He purchased a home, he knew the seller, and the home was in a condition where it would not qualify for conventional financing. So if she were to put it on the market, it would have just been like a cash only. I don't even think it would have been a rehab project. Like, this whole thing is a studs out, like bonkers project, you guys. So that's the kind of stuff my client looks for. But anyway, so he bought it seller financing. The interest rate was agreed upon verbally. The terms are agreed upon verbally. And then once we brought all the parties together, we put it in a contract and everybody signed and lived happily ever after. So what their contract looks like is their interest rate and payment is amortized over 30 years. So just like a traditional 30-year mortgage. And then there's a balloon payment no later than 5 years. So he makes payments for 5 years, just as if he were to pay it off in 30, but at the end of 5 years, at that point, he needs to refinance the property with a conventional mortgage and cash the seller out. So why would a seller do this instead of just selling the house and getting all the proceeds right away? So as I just mentioned in that particular example, this home was not in any kind of condition that it would have sold. So maybe if you inherited a property through probate and your elderly family member lived there and their health was a priority, and so the home got neglected a little bit and it's just not in a condition where selling it through conventional channels is feasible, this might be a good option for you, selling it as an owner contract. So if they're a savvy seller and they don't need the funds right away, they may understand that selling it as a seller financing will actually get them more money in the long run. So for example, if you're selling a house with seller financing, $200,000 at 6%, right? So that's better than what the conventional rates are right now, which is kind of the key. So like if you're going for a seller financing, you want to make sure that you negotiate terms that are better than what a bank might give you. The seller will make their $200,000 plus however long that buyer made payments, every interest collection on those payments as well. So they're going to make, $200,000 plus 6% over 5 years, which is more than $200,000. So if they have a commitment to delayed gratification, they understand they'll make more money in the long run by offering a seller financing option. So a straight seller financing typically only works when the property owner owns the property free and clear and there's no mortgage on it. Otherwise, it would be kind of like a sub-2 owner financing hybrid. So in that circumstance, what that would look like is, say they're selling their house for $200,000, but they owe $100,000 with a conventional mortgage. So that $100,000 conventional mortgage would be taken over sub-2. So a buyer would just take over those payments, and the balance, the additional $100,000, the seller would hold back a note themselves, going in second position behind the first position mortgage. So the property would actually have 2 recorded mortgages on it. Why would a buyer purchase a property with seller financing? Well, a big one is maybe they don't have the credit history or the credit score, or can't get a conventional mortgage with conventional means. Now, it is encouraged that if a seller is going to sell a property with seller financing, that they do a credit check on their buyer, just like a bank would do, just to make sure that that buyer qualifies for your minimum terms that you set for yourself. Also, if a buyer, even if they can qualify for a conventional mortgage, maybe the seller financing terms would be better. So we discussed 6% earlier. Right now, interest rates are like 7.5%. So if you qualify for better terms with the seller financing, that might be a great option too. Okay, as I mentioned a moment ago, the buyer takes title. So the buyer is going to be the new property owner, and the seller is going to record a deed of trust against the property with the county, showing their equitable interest, so that if the buyer ever goes to sell the property, the seller gets their deed of trust paid off first before the buyer gets any proceeds. What this also means is that if the buyer doesn't perform and stops making their payments, the seller can actually foreclose on them, just like any other bank would foreclose on you had you stopped making your payments. And a foreclosure, it's up to the seller if they want to report that to the credit bureaus, because it's not a bank and it's not an agency that would regularly do that as part of their operating procedure. They certainly can, but that's, case by case, I suppose. But what it does mean is that they will take possession and ownership of the property back. The deed will transfer back into the seller's name, at which point, maybe they do it again, maybe they try to sell it, they just do whatever they want. Now they own the property all over again. And the buyer forfeits any payments or equity that they now benefited from having paid down that mortgage a little bit. So with my client, we negotiated a 30-year term, but it could be 40, it could be 15, it could be whatever you and the seller agree upon. So there's no one right way to do this, and there's no one size fits all. As long as all the terms work for both parties, that's really all that's important. Okay, now we're going to flip over to an agreement for sale. What is an agreement for sale? So essentially, an agreement for sale is the same thing as seller financing, but the seller retains ownership of the property until all the contract terms are satisfied. So say we take the similar terms as the previous example, amortized over 30 years, but a balloon payment at 5. So the buyer and seller would agree upon a price, they would agree upon an interest rate and a monthly payment schedule. So the buyer would make payments for 5 years, and then they could take possession if that's part of the contract too. So they could essentially live in the property as well. And at the end of that 5 years, they would pay out the seller as a balloon payment. They would get their traditional financing and cash them out, at which point title and ownership would be transferred to the buyer. That's the key difference, because it's important to understand that with traditional seller financing, buyer takes title, seller is the bank. With an agreement for sale, the seller retains title and still is the bank. So that's the big difference. Buyers, in order to protect yourself, because you're just making payments, what's preventing the seller from just selling it to any Joe Schmo? Because this is not a lease option. You didn't enter into a lease option agreement where they can't sell it. So what you do is you file with the county what's called equitable interest. And that's essentially the opposite of what a deed of trust is. So seller financing, the seller files a deed of trust. With an agreement for sale, the buyer files their right to equitable interest. And what this does is that if the seller does try to get sneaky and sell the property out from under you, it shows that you get the first right of refusal, and you may be entitled to retain all of the payments that you made. You may be entitled to get that back out of the seller proceeds of the sale, because you had an agreement for sale in which you were faithfully making payments in good effort in maintaining your end of the agreement. And there should be a clause in there somewhere that states that, the seller can't sell it out from under you. And that's all great knowledge to have. And if you need to run that by your attorney, you absolutely should. Okay, why would a buyer do this? Why would a buyer enter into an agreement for sale, make payments on a property they don't own, but there's a balloon payment at the end, right? So this is a great way to get into a property with little to no money down, and to not have to go through the normal channels of getting a conventional mortgage, similar to a seller financing situation. This is a cool one. They get to earn equity without actually owning the property. So the agreed upon purchase price is established on day one. So at the end of that 5 years amortization balloon payment term, and you cash out the seller for whatever agreed upon purchase price, all that time you were paying down your portion of the mortgage. And so you actually get some instant equity as soon as you do purchase it through conventional means and you close on the property, becoming the owner. You can also structure it in a way that the payments are super affordable for you, so that once you do balloon out and you start making payments on a regular mortgage, you'll be in a position where you can manage that. So the first few years, maybe you structure it on a 40-year amortization to make those payments really manageable. So that's definitely an idea. So why would a seller sell on an agreement for sale? So basically the number one thing is they have steady cash flow coming in. So if they own the property free and clear, then every payment coming in every month from the buyer is just cash in their pocket. So they have steady income coming from the buyer who has agreed to purchase it at some point in the future. Typically, the seller sets the interest rate, and they do try to make that more favorable than conventional mortgages, because otherwise, buyer might just go get one of those. So not only do they make money on the principal, but they also charge interest. So they're going to have that added to the payment as well. If the property is not in a financeable condition by conventional means, then it may be agreed upon in the contract that while the buyer is making their payments, that the seller actually fixes up the property and puts that money into the property to improve it, to make it such that it would qualify for conventional financing when the buyer is ready to buy at that balloon period. Or maybe the seller actually doesn't own the home free and clear on this one. Say they do owe that $100,000 mortgage, and the payments the buyer is making are actually just going to pay that mortgage just like it would for a regular tenancy. So, maybe they can't do that, straight seller financing, transfer title, hold back a deed, all that stuff. So they do this instead so that, the buyer can still get what they want, the seller gets their 5-year payout, and everybody's happy. So if there's any questions that you have that I did not address in this seller financing / agreement for sale video, put them in the comments. I read all the comments, I engage. I love talking to you guys, so thanks for reaching out. Be sure and subscribe to the channel, tap the little bell so you're notified every time I drop a new video, and be sure to reach out to me if there's anything I can do to support you. Bye for now.